Everyone, welcome to Joffrey the Giant. I'm Joffrey Swait, and I'm here to talk about conspiracy. So, it may surprise you to learn, but I am really into watching the competitive PUBG scene. PUBG is a shooter video game.
Nossa, trocação contra o time da Enxeque. Vai perdendo ali alguns jogadores. O Vox entrou nessa briga.
I know most of you guys aren't necessarily gamers. The reason I like it is that, the biggest map that they play on is 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers in scale. So although it's still a video game, you can run forever, you can get shot in the foot or the neck, and if you have the right healing package, you can continue fighting. But realism is one of their bywords, and so it's a much slower paced game. You play with your team, and given all the space and the different terrain, it actually becomes quite a tactical chess match. So it rewards not only twitchy video game skills, but also tactical awareness, thoughtfulness. Anyway, that's my apologia for being a PUBG fan. Something that happened in a recent tournament really got me thinking about conspiracies, conspiracy theory, and the mentality that has been emerging more and more in this pandemic and post-pandemic time, when it becomes clear to us that indeed there have been conspiracies, we have been conspired against as people, as a people. How does it work? How does it happen? And I think you guys are going to find this tour through some PUBG moments very illuminating. So before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment below, comment throughout this as you're watching. And if you're interested in listening to me talk about that which I am interested in, join the Discord where the conversation continues. Okay, time to talk conspiracies and how they happen. Now, to give you guys a little context, within the PUBG scene, North America and North American teams have historically been far better than Latin American teams. Most of the Latin American teams are Brazilian, but in the last year, really less than a year, all of a sudden the Latin American teams have pretty much achieved parity. They're still underdogs, but really only slight underdogs. And there's been an ongoing tournament over the last several weekends, people qualifying for the Americas tournament that will then take them to the Worlds. Okay. And so after a good performance, the last time America's teams went up against each other, the Latin American teams were competing with each other and the North American teams, and they've been qualifying. Now, the last chance to qualify, sort of a loser's bracket, happened over this weekend. And it was a mix of Latin American teams. As it happens, all Brazilian. A couple of Argentinian teams had qualified. So a mix of North American and Brazilian teams. And this is what the scoreboard looked like right before the last game. Now you'll see as you look at this that as you look at it, you can see that the most important score is the number of wins, the so-called chicken dinners, right? That's why there's a chicken drumstick. If you have a win, you are automatically ahead of anyone else who doesn't have a win. And then the second score is the number of kills that you get throughout the day, throughout the tournament. So if you have one win and 30 kills, you're behind someone with one win and 40 kills. But because this is a loser's bracket, only the top 4 teams are going to progress through. And before this game started, we had the first 2 teams as North American teams, TSM and Dignitas, and the third and fourth place teams, Brazilian teams, and then kind of mixed the whole way down. Now, because of the underdog nature, because consistently through the years, and really in the video game world generally, this is a bit of a thing, but with this game particularly, and really honestly because of Latin culture. There's this underdog inferiority feeling that you actually see in a lot of areas of Latin culture when it comes to the United States, and that has been in this dynamic.
Se terminar com 2 equipes Latam e 2 equipes NA, cara, vai ser muito top, mano. Não vou mentir, não. Queria mais, mas não vai ser de todo ruim, não.
So, Brazilians will pull for any Brazilian team to just beat a North American team. And there's a lot of emotion in that for the people who care about PUBG. And you can hear that in the announcers' voices. Now, of course, this, the American announcers are good. They're fantastic. They do a good job. But there really is nothing like hearing the Brazilian announcers talking about the same stuff.
Vamos lá então, vamos na torcida, porque agora sim vai começar a última queda. A queda que define quem vai classificar. A queda que define as 2 últimas vagas para a grande final dessa PCS 5. E você vem na companhia, vem na torcida pelos times brasileiros. Tá aí o minimapa, o avião já surge no horizonte. As equipes já vão escolhendo os seus spots, você já sabe. Porque agora, amigo, a hora é importante, hora de decisão. Chegou aquele momento. Vamos lá, vamos que vamos. Vamos pra porrada, vamos que vamos, Helen.
Vamos que vamos, brasileirinho. Vamos que vamos, é a hora.
Kind of like that Simpsons scene where you see Americans commenting on soccer and Latins commenting on soccer.
Halfback passes to the center. Back to the wing. Back to the center. Center holds it. Holds it. Holds it.
Halfback passes to center. Back to wing. Back to center. Center holds it. Holds it. Holds it.
So, a lot of emotion. They come to this last game, and everyone's sort of on tenterhooks because only the top 4 make it, and there are Brazilians in the 3rd and 4th place spots. Now, it's going to be very difficult for the game to result, really, no Brazilian teams qualifying for the finals, right? So the game starts.
É a hora, é agora, para garantir as nossas 2 vagas nessa finaleira, ter uma final de PCS 5 digna de Américas, 8 americanos, 8 Latam, e vamos representar, porque as nossas equipes merecem, fizeram um torneio excelente, várias equipes ali na disputa, vamos que vamos, manda o bandeirão, manda energia positiva, que a final agora vai ser só Brasil, Canedo. Essa partida só vai ter brasileiro no final.
Só vai ter Brasil no final de...
Opa!
Ai, Macado!
Meu Deus!
Acho
que eu me empolguei.
Eu vou te falar, mano, nem se for o Quentin Tarantino para escrever um roteiro desse aqui. Olha essa save, Macata. Eu nem lembro qual foi a última vez que eu vi essa save.
And events begin to unfold, which one would think are like a conspiracy. And part of my argument in this video is going to be, they are a conspiracy. But then we have to ask, what is the nature of conspiracy? Okay, so I'm going to avoid making any conspiracy statements as I go through this, but I just want to say right now, until we're at the end, but I just want to say right now that at no point am I suggesting that anyone did anything illegal, broke any rules, right? You cannot actually get together with other teams and make plans to foil other teams, to collaborate. It is illegal to do that. And I'm not suggesting that that was done. That gets into the nature of what conspiracies are. So here's how the last match unfolded. First, the top 2 teams, the North American teams, they had qualified in a way that was unassailable. No one was going to be able to knock them out. It's impossible for them to get knocked out with 1 game left. So they had choices before them. They didn't have to play in the traditional way they might want to. They could let loose. They could play to try to get as many kills and be as pirate-like and flamboyant as they wished. And that's what they decided to do.
E já começa uma briga interessante entre Dignitas e TSM. Na verdade, essa briga aí, Canedão, não é nada interessante pra gente, porque uma dessas equipes vencendo seria bom. E elas se desfalcando agora não fica bom pra gente.
Mas pera lá, como assim que eles... Pera aí, eu não vi a rota do avião, mas a Dignitas, será que foi pra cima? Armou uma arapucazinha ali pra cima da TSM?
Acho que aconteceu. Acho que aconteceu. Eles estão divididos, ó.
Aconteceu, é aquela coisa. Não, cara, você me
Ah,
deu hot dog.
aconteceu. Você tava passando, eu
Pô,
tava aqui
doido.
também.
Nem sabia que você caía aqui, pô.
Pô, você caiu aqui, cara. Pô, foi mal.
So the top two teams started playing the game like they didn't care if they lived or died, because in fact they didn't have to. There wasn't money at stake anymore. And they got their kills, but both those teams went out early. Now, if either one of those teams had won the match, the third and fourth place teams would have made it too. Right? So if either one of those top two teams had won, and they were the best teams, probably the most favored to win, right? But so if they had won again, the third and fourth place teams would have made it.
Essa briga aí, Canedão, não é nada interessante pra gente, porque uma dessas equipes vencendo seria bom.
The next thing that happened was that the very last place team, a North American team that had had a terrible tournament, like clearly the last place team, every time they ran into anybody, they had trouble. They decided to ruin things, to play the spoiler, which is a classic thing that happens in sports, right? We talk about, well, X team was trying to make the NFL playoffs, and this huge underdog wants to play spoiler because they're playing for pride. They want to beat this team. They want to have an impact. They want to be memorable. So they're going to play spoiler. Now, the way No Cap, this American team, decided to play to be spoilers was actually to play very much outside what would normally be sound strategy. So you have the top two teams playing way outside what would be a normal game. Then you have the bottom team playing way outside what would be a normal game. They decided to stay in the blue zone where you slowly die even if you don't fight, because the game constricts to force teams together and force them to fight. They decided to stay out in the blue zone to block a bridge from being crossed. Even though they knew they would almost certainly die, they didn't know who was out there, whose game they were spoiling, but they wanted to play spoiler, and they did it in a way that was way outside what would normally be played. That's not, again, to suggest any dishonesty, but simply to describe facts so we can then talk about what conspiracies actually look like. So what happened? One of these Brazilian teams in the top four ran into them, couldn't get past them.
Detalhe que a Os Guri não tá dentro da safe. Aí a Os Guri vai ter que sair daí. É uma equipe que por enquanto tá classificada, só que tem que contabilizar kill. Tem que farmar algumas kills e tem que tomar muito cuidado com o time da No Cap. Que situação é essa, Canedão, das equipes brasileiras que estão no top 4 ali?
I think they misplayed some things and should have just kept moving to another bridge, but they got stuck and they lost two guys, which at that point made it almost impossible that they would win.
Tô tenso, Maca, tô tenso.
É os Guri. Os Guri tá vindo. Os Guri tá vindo aqui contra a No Cap. E agora a situação é preocupante. O primeiro spray derruba o BRKN, derruba também o Biel. Os Guri perde 2 jogadores. E a situação complica muito, Helen.
Eles demoraram muito pra fazer a rotação. Agora eles vão ter que ir lá e vão ter que tentar passar pela outra ponte, porque eu acho que por aqui não vai passar, não.
Olha só a tragédia, a No Cap tá ainda
Cara,
por ali.
eu sinceramente não entendi nada, não entendi pelo que a No Cap tá brigando, por que eles estão ali. NA gameplay, mano. Sinceramente, não consigo fazer uma leitura de que justifique eles estarem ali. Mas acontece, né? É do game.
So they were in deep trouble. Here's the fourth and final thing that happened. The fifth or sixth place team, 300, a North American team, knew it could qualify if it racked up enough kills to pass one of the third or fourth place teams. So they actually camped behind No Cap, this last place team, on a bridge.
300, porque sabe que tem mais gente do lado de lá, estão parados ali, entendeu? Ai, meu Deus do céu.
Okay. They also ended up risking the blue and eating the blue for a long time. But they were still sort of playing within the normal way one would play PUBG. Normal, again, not being good or bad, just normal. Certainly, they were definitely playing to what was to their advantage and what they needed to do. They wanted to stay alive, but also play in such a way that they could ambush and rack up some kills. Okay. This particular team, 300, is they played a good game from a traditional perspective, right? The fact that this is the last game of the night, with a lot of things already decided, made it so that some of these teams didn't have to play safe or normally, so they didn't. But 300 still had objectives, and they were still trying to qualify. So they sat behind No Cap and killed No Cap as they came through.
E agora vai atravessar, vamos ver se tem uma 300 ainda esperando. Olha só onde está... Inacreditável o que tá fazendo aqui a 300. E agora vai pegar No Cap. E agora vai farmar algumas kills que é muito difícil pra gente. Vamos ver, o primeiro na passagem. O spray derruba já o monte. Vai pra finalizar. No Cap agora para ali no meio do caminho. E aí a situação complica muito pra eles, né? E a 300 vai tomando dano do gás e não quer nem saber, quer farmar kill. Eles sabem que o jogo deles é farmar eliminações, então estão ali pra isso, Helen.
And then moved on to continue playing, and they did succeed in racking up a bunch of kills. So what happened at the end of the night?
Olha só a situação. Não temos mais TSM. Opa, Robinho pegou ali o Oldress, mas o Selfish roubou. Não temos mais a chance da TSM nem Dignitas vencer. Então, quem pode vencer é aquela galera dali de baixo. E pode, sim, uma Space Station da vida levar a vitória e acabar jogando a vaga, né? A 300 ficando ali com um número de kills na frente. Então, ainda tem chance da gente perder essas duas vagas que antes da última queda era nossa.
No Brazilian teams, no Latin American teams qualified. There was a tiny chance that would happen, just looking at it by the book.
Então, eu não queria falar, eu pensei nisso na partida passada, sabe? No intervalo da partida passada. Existia um mundo ali onde a gente perdia as duas vagas. Mas temos Crash ainda que pode... Vai salvar a pátria, Macaco.
Vai agora a granada pra cima da Space Station. É o Crash da Crash. Não. Nossa, o BHZ tá no chão. Ele Fip também foi eliminado. E somente o Kishen. Ele contra os dois jogadores. Que situação nesse momento. A Crash fica aí numa posição muito complicada. As granadas não são efetivas e o Kishen vai ter que segurar. O Kishen acaba sendo eliminado e a Crash fica na quinta posição.
If you consider the circumstances and the interests of all those involved, events conspired, and events that people set in motion. And tragedy of tragedies. I mean, it was interesting to just listen to the Brazilian announcers talking because they were so bummed. And again, this is the bottom qualifier, right? There are already Brazilian teams in there. Man, they were so bummed.
Caraca.
A gente tinha uma chance pequena de perder essa vaga, mas ela aconteceu. Infelizmente,
Marcar,
PlayStation leva a vitória.
Na conta dos nossos analistas aqui, 10% é 100%, entendeu? Então, essa chance que era pequena, na verdade, ela era gigante. Ah, não, cara, não.
A 300 fez uma trap na ponte, pegou 250 kills. A Crash bateu de frente com a Space Station 3 contra 2, tacando granada, tacando tudo, morreu. A Els Guri caiu na trap, da No Cap, que não tinha nada pra fazer na ponte, não sei o que aconteceu, por que ela tava ali meia hora esperando. Eu sei lá, vamos, acabou.
Acabou,
vamos pra final.
Vamos
pra final.
And I think part of what's stuck in their craw, honestly, it's stuck in my craw a little bit as a cheerer, and I watch both the North American and the South American channel, was that it felt like the Brazilian teams hadn't really gotten a fair shake because they had to deal with this environment where people were not behaving in their own in how the game dictates the self-interests usually run. But there are deeper interests at play, right? Let's consider, now we begin to consider the nature of conspiracy. Let's consider those top two teams, TSM and Dignitas. So those two teams knew they had already qualified. And teams have relationships with each other. Now, if they had known the third and fourth place team, they had been American teams and teams they were friendly with, they would have answered the question, should we just play like crazy pirates or not, in a different way, potentially, right? I like the guys in Team X. If we win, Team X makes it with us. So let's play to win. There was no one really, there was no advantage for them or anyone they knew for them to win. So they decided to let chaos ensue. And chaos actually was the one way they could contribute toward more American teams making it. Nothing wrong with that. Certainly nothing unethical about that. Perhaps something outside the spirit of the game, but video game culture is constantly morphing and each game has its own culture. So we can let the PUBGers argue amongst themselves. And of course, all the Brazilians will be on one side and the Americans on the other. But you favor the people you know. You favor the structure you know, and when you have the power, you're going to think about how you can benefit people that you're friendlier with. Now let's consider this last place team. This last place team hadn't made any kind of mark in this tournament. They were looking bad. Now, with one game left, you can see the temptation to give up trying to play toe-to-toe with these guys because you want there to be something for there to be talked about around the PUBG water cooler. Right? Remember when those guys did this or that? Right? Just like playground basketball, right? You have a rep and you want to be talked about. You want to be known. And after going toe-to-toe and failing, there's a temptation of, let's not go toe-to-toe. Let's make a mark. Let's make an impact. It may be toxic. It may not be. But I know we can make an impact. Let's go out there and do that.
Que isso aqui?
Ai, ai. É o Birica aqui. Ai, meu Deus do céu. Vambora. Essa podia morrer pro gás aí, todo mundo aí, ó.
Mas eu vou falar.
Pagar de ser engraçadinho.
Mas
Eu vou
que
falar.
tryhard, hein?
Isso daí é interessante, porque depois eles vão chegar numa posição, dependendo, uma posição bem complicada e com metade da vida, né? Porque vão estar dentro do
Exatamente.
gás. Então, dependendo daí,
Tomara
eles
que
podem...
paguem por isso.
eles podem pagar muito caro por isso. É o que a gente quer.
And then finally, you had the 300 exemplifying really what all the teams are trying to do, which is to just make it, right? So, these Brazilian teams, right? So the third and fourth place team, I'm forgetting that one is Els Guri and the other one was, I have to look now, sorry, Acreshi, right? So Els Guri and Acreshi, they run into this perfect storm of circumstance, an unusual circumstance that involves the will of men, the wills of men. Now, if either one of them had won their match, they would have qualified.
Queridão, vencendo, garante, mas pelo menos tem que fazer aí um bom número de kills para conseguir a classificação, porque agora a gente sabe que tem aí pelo menos uma vaga, como a gente disse, pelo menos vai ser nas kills.
Uhum,
Pelo menos. Então,
uhum.
Crash e os guri tem que se movimentar pra isso.
É, ou nas kills ou na vitória, realmente, né? Eu, por mim, pega uma vitória com uma kill só, tá bom, Marcado. Eu já tô satisfeito.
If either one of them had won their match, they would have qualified. Okay? And that's true of a bunch of teams. Any team that had had one win, if they had won again, they would have qualified. And that included North American and Brazilian teams. So ultimately, their destiny was in their hands. Okay? And the game of PUBG is full of shifting circumstances. Els Guri got caught out by a very hard shift, and that's just something you have to deal with. But when you add that normal circumstances, and in normal circumstances in life, we already have this temptation to speak of conspiracy. And then you add people's self interests or sudden changes in interest, then it can seem like conspiracy. So if we think about the way the world has been over the last couple of years, what you have are a lot of people who had been bound by cultural norms, by government norms, who have suddenly been let loose to do what they've always wanted to do. That can seem like conspiracy. It is conspiracy, but we have to be wider with our definition than just the definition of half a dozen men in a closed room making detailed plans about how to ruin your life. We've also seen the momentum of circumstances carry us certain places in a conspiracy-like fashion. Right? So we talk about the deep state, and are there lizard men? Bureaucracies have always had momentum. And I don't say that to dismiss it. Bureaucracies can take us all the way to terrible, terrible places. They can take us to Zimbabwe. They can take us to 1930s and 40s Germany. Bureaucracies are tools for oppression. Bureaucracies have momentum that have to be controlled by other forces. And when those forces vanish, suddenly you have to deal with bureaucracy in a place where you didn't want to or you weren't ready to. And really, you might argue you shouldn't have to be dealing with them there. But they're just doing what they would naturally do if these other forces aren't at play. Finally, we have the conspiracy of no consequence, right? It's connected to what we've just been talking about, but suddenly we find ourselves at the mercy of agents, governmental agents, corporate agents, who have limited how they behave because there would be negative consequences for them. And when those negative consequences are taken away or become affordable to them, then they are going to follow the momentum that they had been trying to build up. Go to the places where they had always wanted to go. And I say they in some vague conspiratorial way. I do mean specific people and specific types of people, right? So in your town, perhaps, there is a conspiracy to force everyone to mask at all times and in all places, let's say. Those conspiracies are Karen conspiracies. There are very few of these things happening behind closed doors and in closed rooms. These are people assuming that they know what's best, and there's enough of a critical mass of them. The reason we keep seeing teachers and school boards and teachers' union people saying terrible things about what they have the right to decide for your kids, so they've always believed that. But suddenly, they think there are no consequences. And the natural momentum of the bureaucracy that has been set up and the sorts of people who would end up in those bureaucracies naturally takes us somewhere bad. And we find ourselves to have been conspired against. So, we can argue, and feel free in the comments to argue with me. I'd love that, about what constitutes a conspiracy. But what I would like to encourage you to do is to both not have an obsessive view of what conspiracy is, not have an overly detailed, Chestertonianly insane view of what conspiracy is, but instead to have a broad view of what conspiracy is or might be, and maybe take it less personally. Realize that you have to conspire back. You need to rally your troops. You need to build up the mindsets for good, right? You need to strengthen your friends, bless your friends, convert your enemies, and work to do the good things in the world that you want to do. That'll end up feeling like a conspiracy to those who want to bring ill to the world. I hope this has been illuminating. Okay? In a sense, this will make your view of what conspiracy is more personal, but in a sense, it'll also help you take it less personally. It's still a fight. You're still trying to win, right? Trying to win a good life, trying to win the world for Christ. But it's not that they're out to get you. It's that they think they're doing the best thing. And so cries of conspiracy may not be that effective. What is effective is you making your own agenda to do gospel good. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say. The peace of Christ be upon you.
Aí sim é homem de verdade, não é esses troços do grupo não, essas carcaças velhas, UOL, fim de carreira.
Cadê você, profeta, autarquia? Hein? Pedrada no inferno, fala comigo aí, matador de demônio. Hein?